Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, drew a clear line in the sand today for her party and the country when asked about impeaching President Trump. In a wide-ranging interview, Speaker Pelosi told the Washington Post magazine, "I'm not for impeachment. This is news. I'm going to give you some news right now because I haven't said this to any press person before. Impeachment is so divisive to the country that unless there's something so compelling and overwhelming and bipartisan, I don't think we should go down that path because it divides the country. And he's just not worth it. Trump's not worth it." Well, this drew an immediate response from Democratic activist Tom Steyer, the country's leading voice for taking constitutional action against the president. Quote, "Speaker Pelosi thinks he's just not worth it." Well, is defending our legal system worth it? Is holding the president accountable for his crimes and cover-ups worth it? Is doing what's right worth it? Or shall America just stop fighting for our principles and do what's politically convenient? And just moments ago, Speaker Pelosi was asked about her news-making declaration. Let's listen.
Speaker Pelosi, can we ask you why you're opposed to impeachment? Why you're opposed to impeachment right now?
I've always been opposed.
Well, Pelosi's now stated position is sure to draw anger, and not just from the far left of the party. Some have been demanding his impeachment, of course, since the beginning of the Mueller probe.
As far as I'm concerned, he has enough violations. He's been involved in a lot of activity that we believe needs to be made apparent. And so I believe that we have everything that it needs to basically impeach him.
It's really important to understand, you know, I'm here. There is a sense of urgency on my part and many of us. This is not to say that we disagree. I think every single colleague of mine agrees there's impeachable offenses. That's one thing that we all agree on.
If you're creating harm to society, if you're causing things to happen in society that are unacceptable to the people in the United States of America, an unfit president can be impeached for those misdeeds that corrupt and harm society. We're winning that fight.
White House Press Secretary Sanders told NBC News, quote, "Impeachment should never be on the table because the president is doing a great job." That's his spokesperson, of course. Speaker Pelosi did tell the Washington Post that Trump is not fit to be president. What's powerful here is Pelosi's statement today about impeachment. It has the sound of the brakes. She's not just pumping the brakes. She's bringing them down hard, even slamming them, telling her caucus and her Democratic Party that this is bad politics. Well, without the Republicans aboard, it's the wrong road to go down, she says. I'm joined right now by Democratic Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky of Illinois, Eli Stokols, White House reporter for the Los Angeles Times, Cornell Belcher, a Democratic pollster, and Tom Steyer, activist and founder of the Need to Impeach. Mr. Steyer, thank you for coming on tonight. Mr. Steyer, and I was shocked by Pelosi's statement because it seemed to be, it wasn't, well, we're not going to do it right away. We don't have enough stuff right now. It was a statement of direction. We shouldn't be going towards looking to impeach this guy, even though we have a hell of a lot of evidence already. Your thoughts?
Well, I think that what she's saying is, regardless of the information, regardless of how unfit he is, we're waiting for Republican permission to go forward and hold him accountable for his crimes. And I think if we, in fact, let the American people see through hearings exactly how lawless he is, they'll insist he be removed from office immediately.
What article of impeachment, sir, are you confident of right now he deserves to have brought against him? What article?
I think the two most obvious articles, Chris, are obstruction of justice and straight up corruption, that he's been taking money from foreign countries.
And explain obstruction of justice in a moment if you can. Right now, what has he done? I can see things, but what do you see he has done that obstructs justice, misusing his power of office to protect himself?
I think he has done a number of things, starting with firing Mr. Comey because he was investigating his Russian connections, using as many means as he can to frustrate any investigation into his past contacts and behavior. I think it's been a pattern of behavior before he was inaugurated and while he's been president. I don't think there's any question about it, but I think that we need public hearings to lay out the evidence for the American people so they can see exactly how lawless this president is, Chris.
Let me go to Congresswoman Schakowsky. You know the speaker quite well, I understand. Tell me what you think motivated her decision to make such a bold statement today.
Well, she added on by saying, unless there were such compelling evidence that the majority of Americans would agree, it would be very divisive. It's hard to disagree with that. When Nixon was impeached, he had won that election overwhelmingly. But when those tapes came out, the majority of Republicans and Democrats and people across the country said it's time for him to go. We are not at that point. Number two, Chris, if we go into impeachment hearings, that will suck up all the news, all the energy in our country. We need to do things like lower prescription drug prices to continue on with the agenda of the people, making health care more affordable, increasing wages in our country. Those are the things people come home and talk about. And I fear that that agenda would be completely off the table.
Everybody that comes up to me and every one of my colleagues, and you know this, Congresswoman, you're the expert, you're the politician, they come up to us and you know they ask this, when are they going to impeach this guy? That's the question. You hit over and over again from progressives and regular people that are progressive who just want to know. They think he's on the verge of facing. Let me ask you this. Do you think the Republicans will back him or won't back him if he fires Mueller? Because if he goes after the kids, everybody figures he will fire them. And even then, do you really honestly think the Republicans are going to turn on him?
I think there may be a tipping point. If he were to
what would it be? Shooting
Mueller,
somebody on Fifth Avenue? Does he actually have to pull the trigger?
No, I absolutely think if he did something as drastic as firing Mueller, that could be the triggering thing that people said, okay, that is a step too far. But in the meantime, Chris, we aren't just sitting around watching him do what he does. There are serious investigations, and we are preparing, perhaps for a time when impeachment is on the table. Right now, it would suck up all the air, all the energy, and we couldn't do. You know, I don't hear that so much from my constituents. I hear from people who say, I can't afford to pay for my health care.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.